Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, and today's date is May 22nd, Friday, 2026. The time being 5:05 p.m., and I am in cloudy Miami-Dade County, Florida. The topic of today's lecture is MK Ultra Part 6, Biological Terrorism. And I'll have you know, ladies and gentlemen, as I always do, I tend to do these lectures outdoors or in public, so I may have to raise or project my voice from time to time in order to drown out the background noise. Please adjust your volume accordingly, and thank you for listening. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my 6th installment of the Project MK Ultra series. Project MK Ultra, ladies and gentlemen, is right close to COINTELPRO, Operation Chaos, and the Terrorism operation as one of the progenitors to gang stalking. As I oftentimes say, ladies and gentlemen, whoever it was that put gang stalking together here in the United States referenced MK Ultra, which was a CIA and U.S. Army co-op, COINTELPRO, which was an FBI operation, Operation Chaos, which was a CIA operation, and the Terrorism, which was a Soviet East German operation, together. Okay, bits and pieces of each of these programs were referenced and aggregated and very neatly stitched together in such a way so as to implement gang stalking into American society very neatly, very quietly, very quickly, and very effectively. In such a way so as to give the people who practice gang stalking, which is segment A feeling of complete control over society and complete dominance over people who do not practice gang stalking, which is segment B. Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, segment A, the people who practice gang stalking, do it because they enjoy the feeling of superiority that it brings them over segment B, which is the part of the population that doesn't practice clandestine gang stalking. Clandestine gang stalking is a social engineering operation that has roots in Reconstruction era domestic terrorism, the COINTELPRO program of the 1960s, the MK Ultra program of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, the Operation Chaos program of the 1960s, and the Stasi-Terrorism program of the 1970s, 80s, and early 90s. It is a program that seeks to give one segment of the population complete and utter control, not only of the trajectory of American history, but also control over the economy, control over the workplace, control over academia, control over the courts of law that we have here, control over the law enforcement mechanism, control over the armed services mechanism here in the United States, control over the community neighborhood mechanism, and control over people's reputations. That's what gang stalking is all about. And ultimately, it seeks to determine who gets to live how long in this country and who doesn't, with preferable citizens getting light exposure to gang stalking and undesirable citizens like me, your host, getting the very worst of gang stalking, not just so much as to impede the progress that I make through life. That's just scratching the surface, ladies and gentlemen. The goal is to ultimately cause me to lose years because of the physiological stressors that gang stalking imposes upon its target. If you implement a gang stalking campaign, a state-sanctioned U.S. Army and U.S. Department of Justice implemented gang stalking campaign on a U.S. citizen and leave him in it for decades, it's no doubt going to cause a strain on him physiologically, possibly to the point where he loses years and meets a demise or an end much sooner than he would have having never been put in a gang stalking campaign. You see? So, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot to it. Gang stalking is implemented to make a person hate their surroundings, hate the people around them, to hate their communities, to hate their countries, to hate God. Okay, that's what gang stalking aims to do. And that's why I oftentimes say that gang stalking has religious elements to it, because there are religious entities in this country that believe that through gang stalking, they can actually decide who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. Okay, there are churches in this very country who manipulate gang stalking in such a way so as to cause negative staged events in the lives of some and positive staged events in the lives of others. Keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, gang stalking has the ability to help some, but it also has the ability to harm some. It's simply a matter of who you are, what you are, who you present yourself as, what you've done, what you've accomplished, where you're from, who your family is, who your friends are, and what your trajectory through life has been. That's what decides who gets the worst of gang stalking and who gets a boost from it. You see, it's not just about destroying it. Its auspices also have the ability or the capacity to help people, particularly the enemies of the targeted individual. The goal is to put a targeted individual in a constant state of disadvantage while giving your enemies the advantage, so as to further and hurry up your demise or your descent into destitution. Ladies and gentlemen, so without further ado, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. I oftentimes start my lectures off with an introduction that covers matters aside from the main talking points that I feel are of eminent importance and need to be discussed ahead of time. So we're going to talk today about MK Ultra. This is part 6. MK Ultra is a progenitor to gang stalking. Okay, it was one of the programs that the orchestrators of gang stalking referenced when putting this program together. Okay, and like gang stalking, MK Ultra was state sanctioned. Okay, it was built with CIA resources and U.S. Army resources, and the CIA and the U.S. Army got together and took taxpayer money through grants and put this very destructive, very unconstitutional program into motion. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, the subtitle of this lecture is Biological Terrorism, and that's exactly what MK Ultra was. Okay, it was biological terrorism. It was chemical. It was state-sanctioned chemical attacks, and it was high treason. It was high treason, ladies and gentlemen, just like gang stalking is. Okay, it was high treason. And me, your host, okay, I would not emphasize MK Ultra ladies and gentlemen, to the tune of 6 lectures if MK Ultra were not important in the grand scheme of things. It is very important in the grand scheme of things. And the reason it's important in the grand scheme of things is because the biological attack aspect of MK Ultra has been implemented in clandestine gang stalking. Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, I personally have sustained multiple biological attacks at the hands of my gang stalkers. And I found out recently, ladies and gentlemen, probably within the past 30 days, that a good portion of those biological attacks against me were orchestrated by the U.S. Army. Okay? I don't find that a coincidence at all. Why? Because it was the U.S. Army that got together with the CIA in the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s and put together similar biological attacks right here in the United States. At train stations, at airports, in shopping malls, in all kinds of public places, so as to test the effectiveness of germs and bacteria on human beings so they could see how strong and how effective these germs are at harming people in case they had to use them on the Soviets. And that was the rationale. We want to test these, that was the U.S. Army's and CIA's rationale. We want to test these biological agents, these biological weapons on U.S. citizens. And we're going to spray these bacterial agents on U.S. citizens with aerosol cans hidden inside of suitcases. And we're going to send out plainclothes Army personnel to airports in all the major cities: San Francisco, Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York City, Atlanta, Baltimore, Maryland, Detroit, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Miami, Florida, Dallas, Texas, Los Angeles, California, San Francisco, California. Okay, all the major airports in the biggest cities anywhere in the country, we're going to send plainclothes Army personnel to those airports wearing business suits and casual clothes, and we're going to have them carrying suitcases that are actually bacteria guns and have aerosol cans full of bacteria in them. And we're going to instruct these plainclothes Army personnel to walk around these airports and spray people down with bacteria as they go about their business, just to see how bad the epidemic gets. And if it gets real bad, then we, the U.S. Army, will know, hey, these biological weapons are strong enough to use against the Soviets. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, that was their rationale. And I have the documents to prove it. All of the documents that I'm going to provide for you today were pulled off of the CIA.gov reading room. And when I talk about CIA operations, when I talk about FBI operations, when I talk about U.S. Army operations, I like to go directly to the source, ladies and gentlemen. I like to do FOIA requests. I like to do archive requests. Okay, I like to go to the official websites of these government agencies and auxiliaries. I like to go to official sources so as to get officially documented evidence of what it is I'm saying. All right, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that have a hard time believing that the U.S. federal establishment in this country, the United States, could never in its wildest imagination forcefully and intentionally spread bacteria against U.S. citizens in an attempt to make them sick. Okay, we're going to talk some about this today. The U.S. Army got together with the Department of Justice and said, you know, the Soviets are our biggest enemy. We hear they're testing biological weapons over there in Soviet Russia. We need to test biological weapons here in the United States so we can equal their power in biological warfare. But how we're going to test these biological agents out is we're going to use them on American citizens. And we're going to go to all the biggest airports everywhere in the country, and we're going to spray American citizens down with bacteria using these suitcases that are fitted with aerosol cans inside. And we're going to see just how powerful these bacteriological weapons are, in case we have to go up against the Soviets. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was only, what are we looking at, 60 years ago that happened? Of course the U.S. Army is still capable of that. Of course those bacteriological ambitions are still there. And yeah, the same kinds of persons that put together MK Ultra and Operation Chaos and the Zersetsen, the same kinds of people that put together gang stalking, of course they draw inspiration from each other. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to pause for a second and invoke my First Amendment right under the U.S. Constitution to say what I'm saying now, to say what I have said in the past, and to say what I will continually say in the future, having done so because, quite frankly, given some of what I've experienced here in South Florida with governmental or public agencies not only taking exception to my work, not only taking exception to my project, but retaliating against me with public resources because of my expression of political ideas. So for all of you that are constitutionally challenged, maybe you've never read the Constitution, maybe it's above your head, maybe you're cross-eyed and can't see it, I don't know what it is. Read the U.S. Constitution before you criticize anything that I do. And to those of you that get real riled up when you hear the truth, change the channel and go away. Maybe go vacuum your floor and mop your, go vacuum your living room floor and mop your kitchen. Then do some laundry. Maybe go outside and mow your lawn. Then come back inside your house and take the trash out. Then maybe hop in your Oldsmobile and go drive to your barber shop and get yourself a haircut. After that, go to the grocery store and buy some groceries, bring it home. Maybe if you have a wife, or maybe your kids or your girlfriend or whoever you live with can make you dinner. Then maybe make your bed up. Then maybe sit down and watch some television. Okay, do all that. Maybe that'll get your mind off of my project. Okay, this project is not for you. This project is for people who love freedom, who love justice, who love democracy, who love civil rights, who love listening to instructions, people who have a mindset that inalienable rights are important, and that the ability to pursue life, liberty, and happiness are equally important. That's who this project is for. Okay? All others, go run for the hills. Okay? And get your gang stalking information from somebody else. Because this program, this project, is for people who open-mindedly seek facts about the world around them. So thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to begin the lecture. I've selected a number of documents for today's lecture. We're going to read from these documents as I normally do, and then we're going to read from these documents like I normally do, and then we're going to do an analysis on each. The first document is from the Washington Post. It is marked March 11th, 1980. And it is a Washington Post article. It says that the title says that the CIA prolonged research on germ war. This article was written by George Lardner Jr. and it reads, the CIA funded a project aimed at maintaining biological warfare harassment systems for nearly 3 years after President Nixon renounced the use of such weapons, according to a Church of Scientology study of CIA records. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to stop right there at the initial paragraph, okay? Let that sink in, ladies and gentlemen. Let that sink in. Let it sink in real good and deep. The CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, which is considered by all standards the top law enforcement agency in the country, funded a project that investigated the use of biological harassment systems. All right, think of what it is to harass a person with germs, ladies and gentlemen. And that is what the CIA was attempting to learn how to do. I'm sure it's learned how to do it. They've harassed me with germs. But just think of what it is for the government of one's country to attack a U.S. citizen with bacteria. Think of that for a second. Biological harassment systems is what we're talking about. Your country, ladies and gentlemen, at one time in its history, researched how to harass people with germs. Ladies and gentlemen. And this research came after President Nixon said, cut it out. Ladies and gentlemen, President Nixon, once he found out what was going on in MK Ultra, because mind you, the President of the United States was not always briefed on what was happening with respect to CIA operations. But when President Richard Milhouse Nixon, found out that the CIA was testing germs on people, he renounced the use of biological weapons altogether. Did that stop the CIA from testing germs on people? No, it did not. The CIA continued to test germs on people. Why? Because the CIA's mindset in those days was, how dare this president of the United States try to tell us our business? Let the president run his office and we, the CIA, will run our office. The president can run his office his way and we, the CIA, will run our office our way. President Nixon can't tell us what to do. Who does the president of the United States think he is? That's what the CIA is saying. Who does the president of the United States think he is? Telling us that we can't test germs on people. Yes, we can. And yes, we will. And the CIA ignored President Nixon and continued testing germ warfare equipment on people. And mind you, ladies and gentlemen, during these times, the 70s and 80s, the Church of Scientology was very active in pulling documents about CIA activity and U.S. Army activity. The Church of Scientology did thousands and thousands of FOIA requests to the U.S. federal government so that it could get knowledge, inside knowledge, as to the kinds of experiments that the U.S. establishment was allowing using taxpayer dollars to fund those projects. So the Church of Scientology was the first to break a lot of these stories about the CIA's use of germs in public and the U.S. Army's use of germs in public. The Church of Scientology was one of the first organizations to expose that back in the 70s and 80s. Okay? So yeah, most definitely. I mean, definitely kudos to the Church of Scientology. I don't think that it's so much into that now. For example, I don't think the Church of Scientology has released any news reports or any materials on gang stalking. I'm not sure if the Church of Scientology has a stance on gang stalking. But the Church of Scientology these days is not as investigative as it used to be. But there was a time in history where the Church of Scientology was very investigative and was able to discover a lot of documents on the history of the CIA and some of the programs that it used. It continues. The Scientologists and the CIA spent more than $100,000 through 1972 on a program established years earlier to develop operational capability and in the field of covert biological warfare and chemical warfare. In a report scheduled to be made public today, the Scientologists traced the history of the project known as MK Ultra from MK Ultra 78 from looks like 1957 until it ended 8 years ago. So from 1957 to 1972, that MK Ultra program ran, and the program involved the use of a Baltimore laboratory that was assigned to obtain specimens of various microorganisms and breed large quantities with a machine called a biogen, according to the study. So basically, and I'm going to paraphrase the rest of this article. So basically, the CIA, through its MK Ultra project, was able to snatch some taxpayer money out of Congress, and apparently they purchased a machine called a biogen, which is basically a machine that mass produces bacteria. And what the CIA did with this biogen was it took it and it produced large quantities of undulant fever, which is a potentially fatal disease, and it also used this biogen to mass produce a disease called tularemia. So I mean, the CIA was not using this biogen for recreation, to create a spectacle. It was actually taking this biogen and through a laboratory in Baltimore was producing large quantities of really harmful germs, bacteria, and diseases using this biogen. It doesn't say whether or not the CIA took these diseases and threw them on people, but I believe they did. I have no reason to believe they didn't. Of course they took these diseases and went out in the public and sprayed people down with them. Okay? Control over other people's lives, ladies and gentlemen, is what mass production of bacteria is all about. It's what mass production of diseases is all about. It's what organized programs like MK Ultra are all about. You're using the power of the government to mass produce diseases not for their educational benefit or their educational value, but to throw the diseases on people because it gives you the sense of having superiority. Ladies and gentlemen. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move over to the next article here. We're going to look at some notes from a Senate hearing. Okay, we're going to look at the Project MKUltra, the CIA's program of research and behavioral modification, Senate hearing. This is a joint hearing before the Select Committee on Intelligence and the Subcommittee on Health and Scientific Research of the Committee on Human Resources in the U.S. Senate, 95th Congress, First Section, August 3rd, 1977. All right, and this document has a stock number of 052070-04357-1. And what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to read excerpts of this Senate hearing, mostly appendix excerpts that are essentially summaries of conversations that Admiral Stansfield Turner, who was the director of the CIA during this hearing, had with various senators of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the Subcommittee on Health and Scientific Research. So General Stansfield Turner, who was Admiral Stansfield Turner, who was the director of the CIA during this time period in the late 70s, was called to testify before the United States Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the Subcommittee on Health and Scientific Research about the kinds of programs that were run through MKUltra. And one of the things they talked about was the investigations and study of biological weapons, which are the kinds of weapons that are produced in laboratories and have the capacity to get large quantities of people sick. Okay, they're weapons. And some of the implications and consequences from such research were talked about in this Senate Select Committee hearing. And Admiral Stansfield Turner was one of the people testifying. And he was accompanied by certain other persons in the CIA as well. So what I've done is I've highlighted a number of paragraphs from this Senate Select Committee, which is several hundred pages long. Most Senate hearings are several hundred pages long. So what I've did was I've condensed a number of paragraphs of interest to me that I would like to relay to you, the listener. And we're going to go through each of these paragraphs one by one, and we are going to examine their significance to the conversation. So we're going to start on page 11, and mind you, these are appendix notes from the conversations had between Admiral Turner and the Senate Select Committee and the Subcommittee on Health. So it says there are 6 sub-projects on research on drugs, toxins, and biologicals in human tissue, provision of exotic pathogens, and the capability to incorporate them into effective delivery systems. So I'll stop there. Okay, so that basically MKUltra is the project, right? And there are sub-projects that are under the MKUltra banner that are the projects that investigate the use of germs, bacteria, and biological agents on human beings. They call them exotic pathogens, meaning that they are rare pathogens. Some of these pathogens have been cultivated in laboratories and grown exponentially. And there are also studies on how to incorporate these biological hazards into effective communication systems, meaning that these bacteria are not only being grown, they're not only being cultivated, they're not only being stored, but they are being researched and they are being placed in delivery systems like aerosol cans for use on human beings. All right, could you imagine somebody taking an aerosol can? An aerosol can is basically a can. It could be plastic or steel that has a liquid of some kind in it, and you press the button on top and it sprays a mist all around. So what's an aerosol can that everybody knows? A can of Raid, right? You go to the grocery store, you go to a convenience store, you go to a big box retail store, you go to the insecticide aisle, and you find a can of Raid, right? That's an aerosol can. You spray the button, you press the button down on top, and it sprays a mist of bug spray that anybody can use on household pests. Now imagine if somebody took a can of Raid, dumped out the contents, and poured some kind of an infected liquid inside of it that had bacteria in it, and walked up to you in an airport or a bus station and started spraying you down with this aerosol can full of bacteria that was developed in a laboratory somewhere by the U.S. Army and the CIA, because they wanted to see how this bacteria acts when it infects a human being. Okay? Just think of that for a second, ladies and gentlemen. That actually happened in this country. And the word that comes to mind when I think of something like that is disgusting. It's unpatriotic. It's biohazardous. It's violent. It's homicidal. It's careless. It's stupid. It's undiplomatic. It's criminally negligent. It's hateful. It's inconsiderate. And ultimately, it's a crime against humanity. I mean, what kind of government allows its military to spray the citizens of that country down with germs? I mean, what kind of a nincompoop do you have to be? What kind of an idiot does it take not only to devise something like that, but be a part of a government auxiliary and actually sign off on that and allow military personnel to go around doing that to people? Just think of that for a second. The kind of country, the kind of government, the kind of military that can do that to people is the kind of government, is the kind of country, and is the kind of military that can perpetrate gang stalking campaigns against people, period. The United States has proven over the years, through programs like MK Ultra, okay, and others, that it not only has the desire, not only the capability, not only the will, but it has almost a sense of obligation to, in various intervals in its history, perpetrate clandestine acts of domestic terrorism against its citizens under the guise of national security research or biological research or some other kind of research, simply because it can. Right? Let's see how much we can get away with. That's the motto of the U.S. federal establishment. Let's just see how much of this we can get away with before it blows up in our face. Before this whole matter becomes a total laughing stock. And then what we'll do is we'll all sit back. We'll have a few shots of liquor. Maybe we'll smoke a couple of cigars, and we'll snort a bunch of cocaine, and we'll all have a big laugh over it and say, hey, remember that time back in 1978? Remember that time back in 1995? Remember that time back in 2013? You remember that time back in 2026 when we made our army go around and getting people sick in this country and how fun that was? Remember how we used to perpetrate gang stalking campaigns? Remember how we used to perpetrate all these government programs against U.S. citizens and we all got away with it, didn't we? Right? That's what they'll do. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do some paraphrasing. Okay, we're not going to read every word of every document on this Senate hearing. We're going to look at some of the key elements of these documents. All right, there was a part of MK Naomi, which was one of the sub-projects of MK Ultra. The U.S. Army assisted the CIA in developing, testing, and maintaining biological agents and delivery systems for use against humans and animals and crops. So it wasn't just people the U.S. Army and the CIA were testing these germ weapons on. They also tested them out on animals and plants to see how effective they were. And I guess if you were one of the people that happened to be unlucky enough to have these germ weapons tested on you by the U.S. Army and the CIA, you were expected to be patriotic. You were expected to be patriotic and not make a fuss about it. Because after all, if you say the wrong thing about it, you might wind up in a gang stalking campaign, and then they can decompose the quality of your life the same way the East German Stasi did in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s against their citizens who dared speak out against government corruption. Ladies and gentlemen. So there was also an inquiry into the financial disbursements that were made. The CIA paid a lot of college and universities for access to their facilities for MK Ultra research. The CIA paid a lot of colleges and universities. It also paid a lot of hospitals for access to their facilities and their doctors for MK Ultra based experiments on their patients. The CIA also paid a lot of prisons, private and public prisons. Well, probably private prisons. They paid a lot of private prisons executives money for access to the prison doctors so that they could do biological tests on some of the prisoners. Okay, so there wasn't really any particular segment of society that was targeted over the other. The CIA and the Army were testing diseases on anybody. People at the airport, people at bus stations, people at universities, people in hospitals, and people in jail or prison. No one was safe in these days from the CIA or the U.S. Army. And no one's safe today from them either. Now they're running gang stalking campaigns on people. And they found a way to nullify political dissent. They found a way to nullify the Church of Scientology, who at some point in the 1970s was very active in researching these types of things. They're good at nullifying political dissent. They found a way to silence the media on gang stalking. They found a way to silence the office of the president. They found a way to silence Congress. They found a way to silence colleges and universities. They found a way to silence people on this. You see? And this isn't me saying that people who don't talk about gang stalking are bad people. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, I think you've been intimidated by people that you ought not to be afraid of. Okay, there's nothing scary about a grown man or a country full of grown men who fling and receive signals from one another so as to know who to pester or get in the way of. The kind of man who does stuff like that out in public is not the kind of man you ought to be afraid of, and that I can promise you. Ladies and gentlemen, there were financial investigations that apparently the Church of Scientology looked into, and there was apparently 149 sub-projects in MK Ultra. So we're going to look at Appendix A. This is going to be page 65. Testing and use of chemical and biological agents by the intelligence community. The first paragraph reads, under its mandate, the Select Committee has studied the testing and use of chemical and biological agents by intelligence agencies. Detailed descriptions of the programs conducted by intelligence agencies involving chemical and biological agents will be included in a separately published appendix to the Senate Select Committee's report. This section of the report will discuss the rationale for the programs, their monitoring and control, and what the committee's investigation has revealed about the relationships among the intelligence agencies and about their relations with other government agencies and private institutions and individuals. So eventually, the Senate Select Committee is basically saying that one of its goals is, in calling this hearing, is to basically communicate what it's learned about chemical and biological testing by U.S. intelligence agencies, and they've requested detailed descriptions, and they've obtained detailed descriptions of these programs that were used on American citizens. And this section of the report, it will discuss the rationale or the reasoning or the logic for running these programs. But I can already tell you what the Departments of Defense and Justice will say is their rationale. They're going to say, we didn't want to fall too far behind the Soviets. We believe that the Soviets are running similar programs and they're testing biological agents over in Russia. So we don't want to fall too far behind them. Okay, if the Soviets are testing biological weapons and chemical weapons in Russia, we need to be testing them here in the U.S. too. So we can learn about these kind of weapons what the Soviets already know. All right, so we're going to move on. We're going to move on to page 386. All right, we're going to start at the second paragraph. The Select Committee's investigation of the testing and use of chemical and biological agents also raises serious questions about the adequacy of command and control procedures within the Central Intelligence Agency and military intelligence, and about the relationships among the intelligence agencies, other government agencies, and private institutions and individuals. The CIA's normal administrative controls were waived for programs involving chemical and biological agents to protect their security. According to the head of the audit branch of the CIA, these waivers produced gross administrative failures. They prevented the CIA's internal review mechanisms from adequately supervising the programs. In general, the waivers had the paradoxical effect of providing less restrictive administrative controls and less effective internal review for controversial and highly sensitive projects than those governing normal agency activities. So basically what the Senate Select Committee is saying, that based on an investigation that they've run, they've basically learned from the CIA's audit department that the people who were involved in MK Ultra made it impossible, or at least rather difficult, for the CIA's internal review staff, including the Office of General Counsel, the Inspector General, and the audit staff, to do anything that resembled an investigation on MK Ultra. Okay, the CIA, the TSA, the Technical Security Administration, or the Technical Security Division, as it's often called, was very intimately involved in the orchestration of this program, and they found a way to undermine, block, sidestep, and subvert anything that resembled an investigation into MK Ultra. You see, so the components of the CIA, or rather the departments of the CIA that ran MK Ultra and its biological testing mechanisms and its chemical testing mechanisms, particularly on people, they made it very difficult for auditors and internal reviewers, even the Office of the Inspector General of the Department of Justice, to do any type of an investigation on what they were up to. They blocked them. Just think of that, ladies and gentlemen. The department of the CIA that used chemicals and biological weapons on people found a way to block anything that resembled an investigation of their work, so that they could work with impunity, so they could work unobstructed, so they could work without any outside influences hindering the progress of their work. That was their goal. And the work that they were doing was very deleterious. It was oftentimes extremely harmful to the subjects. And because of that, it was unconstitutional on its face. That's why these government programs need oversight. Okay, they need review. They need investigation. They need a proper hierarchy, so that if there are programs of a hidden or covert nature that are run in the United States, okay, that are meant to test people's reactions to them, physically or psychologically, it needs oversight. Otherwise, you're just using state resources to attack the American people. All right, so we're going to move on to the next page. This is going to be page 69, MK Naomi. MK Naomi was another major CIA program in this area. In 1967, the CIA summarized the purposes of MK Naomi. We're going to start at point C. To maintain an operational readiness and readiness special and unique items for the dissemination of biological and chemical materials. And we're going to read point D. To provide for the required surveillance, testing, upgrading, and evaluation of materials and items in order to assure the absence of defects and complete predictability of results to be expected under operational conditions. Under an agreement reached with the Army in 1952, the Special Operations Division at Fort Detrick was to assist the CIA in developing, testing, and maintaining biological agents and delivery systems. By this agreement, the CIA acquired the knowledge scale and facilities of the Army to develop biological weapons suited for CIA use. And SOD developed, the Special Operations Division developed darts coated with biological agents and pills containing 7 different biological agents which could remain potent for weeks or months. So we'll stop there, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, you heard that right. The Special Operations Division of the CIA under Project MK Naomi took biological agents, okay, which is basically germs, and coated the tips of darts with these germs as a weapon. And they also used these biological agents in pills, in pill form, and coated pills with them, so that anyone who took the pill would immediately become sick. So weapons like these were developed by the Special Operations Division of the CIA. I mean, who do you use such a weapon against, is the question. I mean, do you use them against, I mean, who do you use them against? Who takes a dart and coats it with bacteria to throw at somebody and get them sick with the dart? Or who puts pills inside of bacteria agents? Or who takes germs and coats pills with them, like Advil or Motrin or Dones? All right, you take these pills and you coat them with bacteria and you give them to people so that whoever takes the pill can get sick with a disease. I mean, who even thinks of that? And who would you use such a weapon on outside of the theater of war? And for what? So, yeah, these special operations were stationed at Fort Detrick, Maryland, to assist the CIA in developing and testing these kinds of weapons. I mean, in what world and under what circumstances would you need such a weapon? Outside of, like I said, the theater of war. I mean, did the CIA take darts, okay, and send plainclothes agents out to places like Central Park in New York City, and people walking by, or maybe they're jogging by, or maybe they're walking their dog in the dog park? You got CIA agents in plain clothes and they got these darts that have biological agents on them, and they're just walking by poking people with them. Oh, sorry about that. Didn't mean to do that to you. Sorry. And then scurry off. Or maybe there's somebody down there at the lake fishing, and you got CIA agents in plain clothes with these biological agents coated with these darts, and you throw a dart at somebody fishing, and that dart strikes them and gets them sick, just so you can monitor that person over the next 30 days and see how bad they got sick. Why? Because, well, we might need to use a dart like this against the Soviets one day. So we want to test it on American citizens first to see how powerful it is. And then we'll know how to use it against the Soviets if that day comes. And then similarly with the pills, what are you going to do? You're going to walk up to somebody, maybe you have a sick friend or family member who's saying, oh my goodness, I'm in so much pain, or my stomach hurts, or Man, I have got the worst headache you've ever seen. And you as a CIA agent or as a army ranger or what have you, you got a bottle of pills that are coated with bacteria. You're going to give them to somebody who's complaining of an earache or a backache or a wrist ache or something. Here, I got something you can take for that. And you pour a couple of those pills into their hand and they take one or two of them. And then for the next 30 days, you secretly monitor their health to see how bad they got sick from those pills that you gave them that were coated with germs. Pills that came from Fort Detrick, Maryland. And a CIA U.S. Army operation, you give somebody that medicine just to see how sick they get. We're going to have to use these pills on the communists one day. And what we need is patriotic Americans that are willing to let us test how powerful these diseases are on them. So if the day comes where we have to fight the Soviets with pills, maybe we'll run out of bullets and we can put these pills inside of our rifles. See? And then we got a rifle full of pills that are coated with germs and bacteria. And see, then what we do is we take the rifle and we aim them at the Soviets, and we can shoot bacteria-coated pills at them. And hopefully one of those pills lands in one of their mouth. And then when they swallow the pill, it gets them sick and they can't do combat no more. See, that's the goal. And that was really their rationale too, ladies and gentlemen. You know, and it brings me back to clandestine gang stalking. If you got stuff like this running in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, I mean, how was it that much of a stretch to believe that we have similar programs running right now in 2026? It's not about how far we've come as a country. It's about who has power over you. Some people like exercising power over people in ways that are destructive. Okay, people have egos. Some people have bigger egos than others, but everyone has an ego. Some people need their ego fed more than others. Some people need to be able to exercise power over people to feel better about themselves. It's unfortunate, and we have protections against such activity in the U.S. Constitution and in the founding documents of this country, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so we have we're going to go to page. Okay, this is probably the very next page. This is page 69. This is the rest of page 69. So we'll start on the second paragraph. In addition to the CIA's interest in biological weapons for use against humans, it also asked the Special Operations Divisions to study the use of biological agents against crops and animals. In its 1967 memorandum, the CIA stated 3 methods of systems for carrying out a covert attack against crops and causing severe crop loss have been developed and evaluated under field conditions. This was accomplished in anticipation of a requirement which was later developed but was subsequently scrubbed just prior to putting into action. So, it's just kind of a reiteration. I mean, these germs were not just tested on people, they were tested on animals and plants. Because maybe you need to use these darts or these pills to incapacitate a Soviet guard dog. Or an attack canine, or maybe you could take a plane full of poison darts and shoot them at the enemy's crops. And maybe you could destroy the enemy's crops so they can't have no vegetables. Because if you destroy the enemy's vegetable crops with disease guns, well, maybe they can't get their nourishment, and they'll be unfit for battle. You see. So, MK Naomi was terminated in 1970, and President Nixon renounced the use of any form of biological weapons that kill or incapacitate. But keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, the CIA ignored this and continued producing biological agents. The CIA was ultimately concerned with the creation and the development of chemical, biological, and radiological materials, which is pretty disgusting, to say the least, particularly if they're being used outside of the theater of war. And apparently it was continued throughout the 1970s, and it was probably continued all the way to the present day. I mean, the CIA has a lot of programs that it uses against U.S. citizens covertly. You know, here in South Florida, the kinds of biological weapons that are used here are they have actual weapons that are used, but they also use people as weapons as well. So, for example, the story about the U.S. Army going into airports and bus stations and using aerosol cans planted in suitcases to spray U.S. citizens with bacteria and various other germs and diseases. Okay, that's only the tip of the iceberg. They still do that today, ladies and gentlemen. They still use material objects to spread bacteria and diseases on U.S. citizens in various parts of the country. For research purposes. But it's not just that. In gang stalking campaigns, they also use, in addition to that, they basically use disgusting, knuckle-headed, useful idiot tools to take signals and walk up to people with their bodily functions and spreading germs through the air that way. Okay? I'm going to stop there. I don't think that needs much more explanation. What we're going to do is we're going to carry on into the next the next page. This is going to be page 73, the rationale for the testing process. So I'm going to paraphrase this. So the Senate Select Committee wanted to know what the CIA's reasoning was for using these kinds of biological agents and chemicals on people. And the CIA's response was, we didn't want to fall too far behind the Soviets. The Soviets were using these types of biological agents on people. So we're going to use the same kind of biological agents on people and chemical weapons so as to keep up with the Soviets. We, as the United States, reserve the right to kill, destroy, and make ill our citizens for the purpose of testing weapons that we might need to use against our enemies. We reserve the right to do that, and we have enough useful idiots here in the U.S. that will assist us in plainclothes operations for free. You don't have to pay a useful idiot. All you got to do is use them. Okay, the East German Stasi taught us that. Okay, I think it was like 1 in every 60 people in East Germany was a Stasi agent, a plainclothes civilian spy for the Stasi. Most of them weren't paid. Why? You don't have to pay a useful idiot. All you have to do is signal them to do something and they go do it. It's just the same here in the United States. There are enough useful idiots right here in the U.S. to where if the U.S. Army and the CIA wanted to put people in gang stalking campaigns where they could be run over by a synchronized vehicle or mobbed by synchronized groups of thugs or attacked or made sick by a bunch of useful idiots carrying biological agents that they sling on people, or maybe you're one of the useful idiot biological terrorists that like to use your bodily functions through the air to get people sick. Maybe you're one of those. You're not paid. You're not paid. You're a useful idiot. You're being used by the CIA and the U.S. Army in a social engineering experiment where you get to pester people, harm people, attack people, and get people sick with no penalty. That's what a gang stalker is. That's what you people get to do to people with no penalty or consequence. And it makes your lives interesting. And it's also a matchmaker program. There are a lot of gang stalkers that have met their husband or wife while they were out doing signaling. You see? So, I mean, again, there are multiple ways you can get a person sick. Okay? I mean, there are a ton of ways you can get people sick. I mean, I've had people drive past me on motor scooters and sling unknown chemicals out of bottles into my face. That's a biological attack. That happened in Olympic Park on May 1st of this year. I'm sorry, May 1st of last year. And you can check my West Baptist Health medical charts and see for yourself where I went to the hospital for chemical exposure. Okay? Check my West Baptist Health medical charts for May 1st of 2025 in Olympic Park. That's where the incident happened. There are a ton of ways to get people sick. I've had chemicals thrown at me through bottles. I've had people throw chemicals out of windows of speeding cars at me. People I don't know. They're just gang stalkers. They took a signal to do this stuff. Like I said, they're useful, unpaid idiots. Okay, I've had people use various contraptions and devices to spray bacteria in the air around me. Okay, I've had knuckleheaded thugs come around me and use their bodily functions to spread bacteria through the air. Okay, there's a million and one ways to transmit bacteria when you're dealing with the U.S. federal establishment. For 75 years now, they've been researching ways to get people sick as a way of testing biological agents. Okay, there's a million and one ways to get people sick, and the CIA and the U.S. Army have mastered all of them. And now they got useful idiots in the form of gang stalkers who communicate in signaling mechanisms all across the country, going around getting people sick just to test out these new bacterial elements that are being created right here in American laboratories. I mean, when COVID broke out, all you heard was the U.S. federal government, pretty much all its politicians and a lot of its political commentators who are on like cable news and local news were all saying, hey, you know what? China sent that disease over here. How do we know that? How do we know China was responsible for that? How do we know that the U.S. Army wasn't responsible for that? The U.S. Army has a 75-year history of developing diseases in laboratories and then going out into the world and using them on people. I've never heard of China creating a biological weapon and releasing it anywhere, but the U.S. Army has done that many times. I'm more inclined to believe that that was a homegrown virus that was developed right here in the U.S. by the U.S. Army and spread about the country just as a way of exercising control over people. Period. That's what I think. I mean, you should see some of the kinds of disgusting knuckleheads they got spreading just regular bacteria. Those same knuckleheads were running around the state of Florida spreading COVID the same kinds of different ways. Okay? Florida is a hotbed for gang stalking activity, and yes, it is DOD and DOJ run. Okay? And for those of you that listen to my lectures and say you should be nicer, you should be sweeter, you should be kinder, you should be more patriotic, these are kind, caring, loving, compassionate, and patriotic lectures that I'm giving to people who like facts, who like the truth, and who like to see the world around them for how it really is. Okay, people like that will listen to my lectures and say, wow, these are wonderful lectures. They're loving, kind lectures. They're patriotic lectures because they tell the truth how it is. And they don't allow these buffoons that practice gang stalking throughout this country to bother him. And he's giving away this material for free online to the whole world so that nobody will be fooled by it. It doesn't get any more loving than that. It doesn't get any more patriotic than that. So we're going to move to the next topic. The next topic is going to be the death of Dr. Frank Olson, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Frank Olson was he became famous in the 1950s for his work in aerobiology. That's the study of bacteria that flies through the air, basically. It's essentially like airborne bacteria. He was a biologist whose specialty was airborne bacteria. Like the kind that gang stalkers like to fling through the air using gadgets and compartments and their physical effects. Okay, Dr. Frank Olson was an expert in such biology. To make a long story short, Dr. Frank Olson was experimented on with LSD by another doctor named Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, and he basically attended a conference at Deep Creek Lake, Maryland, in a cabin. And there were quite a few Army doctors in that cabin, and they were all going to exchange ideas on some of their scientific research. And there was a doctor there that was a part of the CIA's MK Ultra, a guy by the name of Sidney Gottlieb, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who said, I don't care how famous Dr. Olson is for his biomedical research, I'm going to experiment on him. And basically, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb grabbed some LSD and threw it in Dr. Olson's liquor bottle. And Dr. Olson went to drink the liquor, and he started hallucinating. And over the next 8 days, Dr. Olson's mental health became worse and worse, and then he ended his life by jumping off a 100-foot balcony at a hotel in New York while he was seeking treatment. Okay, that's the kind of respect that the United States has for its doctors. Okay, that's the kind of respect that the United States has for its army scientists. And that's the kind of respect that the United States has for its people, period. Okay, let's pay a doctor named Sidney Godaleb in the interest of biomedical research using MK Ultra to essentially poison another army researcher and cause him to go crazy and kill himself. Yeah, it's a horrible tragedy. Yeah, the guy's wife is all torn up about it. Yeah, his kids are without their father. But hey, we learned a lot about biological research. Hey, the CIA is accomplishing its goals. Hey, MK Ultra is getting closer and closer to completing its mission. Yeah, okay, we lost a doctor or two, but hey, listen, the CIA and the U.S. Army are still progressing in our biomedical research program. Right? And that was the attitude of the CIA and the U.S. Army, period. And that's the attitude that the CIA and the U.S. Army of today have about gang stalking. Yeah, okay. Who cares if a few TIs, targeted individuals, get hurt, maimed, sick, or killed? We are gathering important data about human behavior, and that's what counts. Right? That's the U.S. federal government's attitude towards me, your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith. That's the U.S. Army's attitude towards me. That's the U.S. Army's attitude towards you too, citizens. If you are a targeted individual, that means that your government has basically written you off as expendable, and that your life is only of any value for behavior research by the Departments of Defense and Justice and their useful idiots. Let's not forget them. The millions of stalkers across this country that communicate using signals as to who to pester and make ill, ladies and gentlemen. All right. So we're going to look at the aftermath of Dr. Olson's death. This is going to be page 78. So following Dr. Olson's death, the CIA made a substantial effort to compensate his family, but the CIA hid from his family what happened. Okay, they didn't tell the Olson family, hey, as a part of an experiment in human behavior, we had a doctor named Sidney Godaleb go to a log cabin in Fort Detrick, Maryland. And what he did was he found your dad, Dr. Olson, all right? And what he did was he walked over to your dad with a handful of LSD. And see, when your dad, Dr. Olson, when your daddy wasn't looking, kids, Dr. Sidney Godaleb threw the LSD in your dad's liquor bottle. And then when your dad drank it, he slowly lost his mind. And apparently 10 days later, he jumped off of a 10th story balcony, kids. And that's what happened to your dad. Right? The CIA wasn't about to do that. Not because it cared about the kids' feelings. It did that because it didn't care about the Olsons at all. It didn't want them to know the truth about what happened, so it kept it secret for a while. But at some point, the Olson family found out. Uh, and they sued the U.S. federal government, and I think they sued for $10 million, the Olsons, and President Jimmy Carter lowballed them. He only gave them about $750,000, which, I mean, in today's money is about $3 million. But they wanted 10 because the CIA murdered their husband and father. But they got $750,000 courtesy of President Gerald Ford, which is better than nothing, right? It's better than nothing. And they got an apology letter from President Ford and Admiral Turner about what had happened. And that's what the Olsons got for the loss of their husband and father. They got a check for $750,000 and an apology letter. Go figure. I guess the CIA, the Army, and the U.S. federal government didn't want this to become too big a story. And they did a good job suppressing it. I mean, a story like that should have made international headlines for government human rights abuses, but it didn't, because the U.S. Army, the CIA, and the Office of the President got together and suppressed it. So very few people were able to hear about the problems that arose in the Olson family from the death of Dr. Olson, which was a horrible tragedy for that family and a horrible misstep for the CIA, because Dr. Olson's life and his death became a rallying cry for a lot of people that were against these kinds of experiments being done on people. And ultimately, in today's world, all these government actors that have put together gang stalking have done an excellent job of finding ways to suppress this truth from coming out. But as the saying goes, and this saying is probably the truest saying that you will ever hear, you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. Okay? All right, so what we're going to do is, I think we pretty much covered the gist of the Senate hearings. We're going to look at a number of paragraphs in Freedom Magazine, which is the independent journal published by the Church of Scientology. This is a special edition of Freedom Magazine. It's from December of 1984. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a quick sip of water and a quick puff of a cigar, and I will be right back. 1 second, please. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes I puff tobacco during my lectures. All right, so I do my lectures outdoors a lot of the times, and sometimes I do them in other public places like shopping malls, because I like the openness of being outdoors, or in very spacious areas. For me, it stimulates thought. It stimulates perspective. It stimulates the exchange of ideas. And it also gives me the opportunity to see who walks up. Okay? Oftentimes I'll have persons who are obviously signaled to me walk up to me or sit down immediately next to me or crowd my space in another way, obviously in an attempt to disrupt the lecture. I need that. Okay, I need that. I need to feel that while I'm speaking, to remind me of what it is that I'm fighting against administratively. Now, there's no doubt, ladies and gentlemen, that I have people who are either jealous of my work or hateful of my work or skeptical of my work that are trying to find ways to not only derail my project, but derail me personally. Okay? I got people that try to criminalize me for doing what I do, but that goes to show how shallow and useless they are, because who has time to sit around and find ways to try and criminalize a person who's getting the word out on a societal problem? Yeah, I'm harsh with my words. Yeah, I'm brutal with my words. But that's because gang stalking is harsh and brutal, and it's dangerous. And gang stalking campaigns can be leveled against men or women. And yes, children are thrown in the mix too at some point. So it's a really hateful, horrible it's a really hateful and horrible program. So sometimes I use hateful and horrible words to describe it. And it's simply just how I've chosen to approach this thing. So having said that, we're going to look at Freedom Magazine. It's It's got quite a few. It's about 7 pages, but there are dozens of paragraphs. And what we're going to do is we're going to read through a good portion of it. I mean, we don't need to read every single word of every paragraph. There's a lot of information here that we can disseminate together. However, I'm going to pick what I believe to be the key points of this newspaper article, and we're going to go through a few of them. This particular article reads, "The Army conducted germ warfare test in Washington's National Airport." And this article is written by Stacy Young and Andy Lenarsic. They are both members of the Church of Scientology. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to read through a few key paragraphs. I've highlighted several, but I'm gonna read from the ones that I believe are most conducive to my talking points. We're going to read the first one. It says, "The U.S. Army recently sprayed potentially harmful bacteria in 5 open-air tests in Washington, D.C. in 1964 and in 1965 as part of a biological warfare experiment, according to declassified Army documents obtained by Freedom under the Freedom of Information Act. Although heavily censored, the formerly secret documents published by the U.S. Army Biological Laboratories at Fort Detrick, Maryland, revealed that personnel from the Army Special Operations Division used specially designed suitcases to spray a strain of bacteria called Bacillus subtilis on unsuspecting travelers in Washington's crowded National Airport and Greyhound bus terminal. Now, I'm going to stop there. Now, the Army said that they thought that these bacteria were harmless, but they're not harmless, and furthermore, that doesn't make any sense. Why would the U.S. Army take bacteria guns disguised as suitcases and spray people down with bacteria that's harmless? What's the point? Why spray somebody with a bacteria that's harmless or supposedly harmless? We know that these bacterial agents are not harmless. We know that these bacterial agents do cause diseases in people or sicknesses in people. What's the point of spraying somebody with a harmless bacterial agent? Why not just leave the people alone if that's what's happening? It's because that's not what's happening. These bacterial agents are meant to cause sickness, but they're covering their tracks by saying, well, we thought they were harmless. No, you didn't think they were harmless. You knew that they were harmful, but you used them on the American people anyway for research purposes. Period. I'm going to continue. This is the paragraph that's right above the image. It says, using the number of one-way and round-trip tickets being sold at the time of the test, the Army report estimated that the infected passengers would carry the bacillus to more than 200 cities. So that means because of this project, infected passengers would carry this bacteria that was sprayed on them by the U.S. Army to 200 cities around the country. That's biological terrorism. Period. The Army team estimated that New York, Washington, D.C., Boston, Chicago, and Los Angeles would receive the highest incidence of infection from departing passengers. Due to massive deletions in declassified documents, it could not be determined whether there were any follow-up studies of the infected passengers in the destination cities. So spray as many people with bacteria as possible. Let them carry the disease to as many U.S. cities as possible, and then delete all the records so that no one in the U.S. Senate Select Committee of the Intelligence Committee can find out just what the heck you've done. That was the point of that. Infect as many U.S. citizens as possible so as to exercise control over people's lives, and then delete all the records you can of the experiment so you can't be punished. Yeah, that happened here in the United States, ladies and gentlemen. The declassified documents revealed that the Army also planned experiments in Greyhound bus terminals in San Francisco and Chicago. The cost to pay for 6 operatives to launch covert attacks in the targeted cities for 7 days was estimated at $22,000. That's how much of the taxpayer money was used to pay the operatives who were walking around bus terminals and airports spraying people down with bacteria. It cost $22,000 out of the U.S. Treasury to do that to U.S. citizens. purpose of the testing was to study the consequences of using smallpox as a biological warfare agent. You know, smallpox is not only real contagious, it's deadly. And the U.S. Army walked around bus terminals and airport terminals and sprayed people with it. For biological research purposes. Ladies and gentlemen, you cannot make this stuff up. This happened. It sounds like something you'd hear in a horror movie with science fiction elements. You guys remember that movie, The Blob? The Blob was a horror science fiction movie that was released in the U.S. in 1984. All right, in my opinion, it was a really good horror movie, a really good science fiction movie. The Blob was one of those movies that it sort of crossed the genre. It was a genre buster, okay? It was both horror and science fiction. What happened here is not a movie. This happened in real life. But this instance of spreading diseases to people willingly by the government reminds me of that movie, The Blob. Because in that movie, The Blob, there was basically a army research facility that developed this huge monster called the Blob that was capable of eating people and shooting acid at people. And the more people that this blob ate, the stronger it became. And towards the end of the movie, the viewer gets to see that the blob was actually created by state governments in laboratories run by the state, and that they actually set this blob free out into the world to see how many people it would eat, to see how many people it would consume, to see how many people's faces it could throw acid into, and to see how many people the blob could physically kill. That was essentially what happened here. Think of these smallpox infections as the blob. Our government took these diseases and set them out into the world via infected hosts, just to see how much damage it would do before it was finally contained. And that's what happened in that movie, The Blob. The blob was created in government laboratories. It was sent out into the world to see how many people it could destroy before it was contained. That is exactly what happened here. It was a similar situation. And I wouldn't be surprised if that movie, The Blob, got inspiration from this MK Ultra project. I would not be surprised at all. So the goal was to get as many people sick as possible. Let me see here. We're going to look at something else. Okay, it's getting ready to start. Looks like it's about to start raining. So I'm going to have to find an area that has an overhead cover so that I don't get rained on, but it looks like it's about to start raining. I'm outside right now, ladies and gentlemen, in a public park. I felt a few raindrops, so I'm going to keep talking. If I have to pause briefly to avoid the rain, I will let you know. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit. All right, so I'm going to read from the article that's beneath this. We're going to read one paragraph. The article is called "Above the Law." It's got a similar theme to it, CIA experimentation. This particular experiment is of a chemical nature, which it still falls into the MK Ultra sort of the MK Ultra canon of experiments. And in this experiment, some really horrible things were done. It reads over, and this article was written by Thomas G. Whittle. And there is a quote. It says, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law." That's Article 5 of the Bill of Rights. And this CIA program expressly violated Article 5 of the Bill of Rights. It says, "Over the years, Freedom has covered case after case of government crimes against citizens. We reported that the January 8, 1953 killing of Howard Blower, a U.S. Army colonel, by Central Intelligence Agency's psychiatrist. Blower was injected against his will with a powerful mind-altering derivative of mescaline at New York Psychiatric Institute. It basically talks about Frank Olson briefly as a comparison. Then it says that those who perform these experiments have a bizarre detachment from any responsibility from the effects of their actions. Elizabeth Barrett, the daughter of Howard Blower, was 13 years old when her father was killed by the CIA. She told Freedom when he got that last injection, he had violent, life-threatening reactions for 15 minutes before they made any move whatsoever to try and help him. They just stood there and watched as if saying, "Oh, he's dying. Isn't that interesting?" One of the psychiatrists involved in the CIA experiments involving Blower, James Cattell, later remarked, "We didn't know whether it was dog piss or what it was we were giving him." So, this particular CIA experiment was done on a man named Howard Blower. Okay, it was familiar. It was a familiar experiment to the one that was performed on Frank Olson. But the experiment that they performed on Howard Blower killed him instantly. Okay, the experiment they performed on Frank Olson basically killed him over a period of about 8 days. But the experiment that the CIA performed on Harold Blower, who was actually a U.S. Army colonel, killed him instantly. They injected him with mescaline, okay, just to see what their reaction would be on this U.S. Army colonel, and it killed him in 15 minutes. And the doctor said, well, that was basically this was our first time using this experiment. We could have been injecting him with dog urine and we wouldn't have known. Right? There's an interesting quote in this article. It says, "The rights and freedoms passed down to us and paid for in blood lose their value when a portion of the government can insist with impunity that it is above the law." All right, and that's a reference to persons who died in wars like the Revolutionary War, like World War I, like World War II, wars that had potentially catastrophic consequences for the United States. Okay, those who paid for our rights and liberties and freedoms with their blood. Their sacrifice is made. Put it like this. This quote is saying that their sacrifice is devalued when the government whose behalf they fought and died for believes it is above the law. It is a total devaluation of the sacrifice that armed services personnel gave when losing their lives in very consequential battles across the last 250 years, when the government basically says, all right, thank you for your service, thank you for keeping America free. Now we're going to spread germs around the US with impunity, and we're going to do tests on people that could kill them, using those same government resources that we used to send you all out into battle. So yeah, it's pretty gross. It's pretty gross, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to look at the next page, germ warfare tests. And here you have basically you basically see a picture of the kinds of suitcases that were used to spray people down with bacteria. And we see a number of other paragraphs. What I'm going to do is, let me see. All right, it says here we're going to look at the germ warfare tests section. It says, probably the second paragraph, it says freedom, and mind you, that's the name of this newspaper. It's the Freedom newspaper, and it's managed by the Church of Scientology. Freedom's revelation several years ago that the Army, in concert with the CIA, had conducted similar tests on unsuspecting citizens in New York, Florida, and elsewhere. However, this is the first time that the nation's capital had been found to be the target of biological warfare experiments. Although the documents do not reveal whether CIA participated in the test in Washington, let me see this article. Okay, there were the delivery mechanisms consisted of basically just spraying people down with these suitcases they basically had aerosol cans inside filled with smallpox. And they were just running around the station, walking around spraying people with it. It really was a disgusting experiment. We're going to scroll down beneath the two images. Same section. It says the documents included detailed instructions for growing smallpox viruses in large quantities. Okay, the way this article is written, the way this article is coded, it's got an awkward paragraph structure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read down. So here's what it says. So the Army actually went into the snack bar and while people were eating in the snack bar, They were taking these suitcases and spraying them with highly contagious bacteria. And nobody who was being sprayed, actually they were spraying them down with viruses. No one knew what was happening. No one knew what was happening. No one knew they were being sprayed with smallpox. No one knew they were being sprayed with germs. No one knew they were being sprayed with biological agents. All right? And all three were being used. And a lot of this was being done in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. And this was the Special Operations Division of the CIA and the U.S. Army doing this. All right. Let me scroll down a little bit. All right, now so this next page it basically is a reiteration of a lot of what we've already covered. It talks about Harold Blauer. It talks about Frank Olson. It talks about the MK Ultra's drugging platform, where thousands of people in the U.S. were given LSD without their knowledge. That's something we've talked about. It looks like this program, this MK Ultra program apparently it cost $110 million to run. And believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, there was actually a Nazi doctor that was involved in MK Ultra. Here's the statement here. When in August 1975, the Army released some of the details of its LSD program, it identified Dr. Paul Hawk as one of the principal investigators of this project. Dr. Hawk, a refugee from Nazi Germany, was one of the most influential and respected psychiatrists in the United States. Okay, I'm sorry, he was a refugee from Nazi Germany. He was a refugee. I misread that sentence there. Paul Hawk was a refugee of Nazi Germany. There was also a Dr. Sidney Mallett who assisted in the drugging of both Mr. Blauer and Mr. Olson. And there was another doctor named Dr. James P. Cattell who also assisted in the drugging of Mr. Blauer. He was the one who was injected with mescaline and died 15 minutes later. Okay, he had a wife, he had daughters. One of them was 13. The CIA paid doctors to hold him down and inject him with mescaline. And he died in 15 minutes. Let's see, we're going to scroll down, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to read one of the quotes on the back page, the final page, page 7. The facts are clear enough. Prominent American psychiatrists are implicated in the most serious and systematic violations, not only of medical ethics, but that of criminal law that have ever been brought to light in the United States. Let's see here. I want to read this part where it talks about Dr. Cattell. Dr. Cattell worked with Dr. Hawk in the administering of mescaline to Mr. Blower. Basically, they co-authored a paper on pseudoneurotic schizophrenia and pseudotherapeutic poisoning. So eventually what they were trying to do was they were trying to prove in this experiment that you could inject somebody with a chemical and make them schizophrenic on the spot. But the chemical that they injected Mr. Blower with, the mescaline, it killed him in 15 minutes. And they called that pseudotherapeutic poisoning. You see, so it wasn't about the life of Mr. Blower. They weren't concerned about the life of Mr. Blower. They were concerned about the data being gathered, and that's just how gang stalking is. The targeted person's lives are not considered to be of any use or value. The only thing that's of use of or value to the orchestrators of gang stalking is the data that's collected from the turmoil that the targeted person experiences at the hand of their stalkers, undercover operatives, and liaisons. There was another doctor from the Division of Neuropharmacology at the University of Missouri. Its Institute of Psychiatry. In November of 1975, Dr. Marazzi was accused of having, at a Senate subcommittee, of having devastated a young psychiatric patient with LSD in an Air Force-funded experiment in 1965. His accuser, Mrs. Mary Ray, then a psychometrist at the University of Minnesota Hospital, said that the patient, an 18-year-old girl being treated for personality disorder, definitely did not want to be part of the experiment, and they forced her, and they gave her LSD against her will in this Air Force funded experiment. And she was completely psychotic because of that LSD dose. LSD has the ability to make a person psychotic. Okay, LSD can cause a person to develop psychosis. Okay, LSD is a highly hallucinogenic drug that could have devastating impacts on the brain of a person. Okay, and apparently there was this experiment that the Department of Defense wanted to try it on as many people as possible for experimental purposes. And this was the Air Force that did this one. See, it wasn't just the Army. Okay, the Navy and the Air Force also conducted experiments on people. All right, and they made an 18-year-old girl turn psychotic. So, I mean, that's the end of that particular article, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to close the lecture on that point. We've covered all the main talking points that needed to be covered. In conversations like these, when you're examining documents, and a lot of the documents have similar information, similar instances, and similar characteristics, you don't need to read every word of every document in order to get the point across. So I paraphrased a lot of the documents that I read from today so that they would complement one another and not overlap one another. And I believe we covered all the important talking points that I hope to cover today. Ultimately, you simply just had a situation where our government performed experiments on people that included biological agents, bacterias, viruses, chemical substances, and coercion. And it's a shame. The U.S. isn't the only country in the world that's tried such experiments on its own people, but it's the country I live in, and I'm the subject of an experiment right now. It's called Project Gang Stalking. And I don't want to be a subject in this project. I think it's harmful. It's deleterious. Its goal is to get me incarcerated, harmed, institutionalized, or killed. And quite frankly, I think it's cowardly to put U.S. citizens in such a program and then turn around and continue to call yourself a constitutional republic or a democracy. No, you're not a constitutional republic, United States, and you're not a democracy. You are an institution that has the capacity to sell the use of your resources as a government to the highest bidder. Okay, and it is government contracts that are passed out to the Army, to the Navy, to the Air Force, to various hospitals across the country, to various businesses across the country, including private security firms, in order to perpetrate this nasty, stinking, hostile program called clandestine gang stalking against whoever. And you guys, if the U.S., its government auxiliaries are collecting data on me, go ahead, keep collecting data. I'm putting data on the internet later today. It's going to be called the EIS Media Group Lecture Series. Its host is Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, yours truly, and the lecture is called MK Ultra Part 6, Biological Terrorism. And in this lecture, which is going to be available for the whole world to see, I talk about experiments that are happening right here in the United States that resemble MK Ultra, COINTELPRO, Operation Chaos, and the Stasi-Zersetzung. All right, let's not forget Adolf Hitler's Schutzstaffel, Benito Mussolini's OVRA, and Joseph Stalin's People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs. All of these mechanisms are present in gang stalking. And this program has had a deleterious effect on my life, and I resent that as a U.S. citizen who is guaranteed the opportunity to life, liberty, and happiness under the founding documents of this country. I resent that, and I resent the knuckleheads that you all are sending around to punish me for simply being who I am. My personality has not changed. My attitudes towards the world around me have not changed. I have not changed psychologically. I am of a sound body and mind. The only thing that this project has managed to do is disrupt my college education, disrupt my interpersonal relationships, and disrupt any workplace opportunities that I've had. But you're not going to disrupt this project, and the reason you're not going to disrupt this project, gang stalkers, is because this project is based on First Amendment principles. I have the freedom of speech to talk about what you all are doing. If you all have the right to perpetrate this crime against humanity against me, continue it, and I'll continue doing videos exposing your thuggery to the world at large. Thank you for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen.